Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 17th, 2016. Time for another show, time for another week. Monday, it's happening again. Don't seem to be able to stop it, but then again, we don't seem to be able to boot Firefox this morning either. So, I guess all's going well. Let's see. Skype up and running? Yes. Check. Justice up and running? Yes, I think so. Not that I can open any of messages. Get the pinwheel of death at the moment when trying to open things. It looks like the Skype is functioning, but Firefox seems to be eating the brain of the computer at the moment. So hopefully everything goes out live and A-OK and thumbs up and all of that stuff. We got plenty to cover here. Plenty left over from last week. Much discussion this morning of the possibility of a post-election Trump TV launch. Of course, nothing's more likely in Trump world than the launch of something. That is, I think you can count on a launch of something, anything, about every 3 months or so in Trump world. Reason being, as I outlined over the weekend via Twitter, and perhaps you were able to tune in and catch some of that. I should do a Twitter show of I don't know exactly what you would call it, but what if you just tweeted every day at 6 o'clock, like Donald Trump does it every 3 a.m. and people tune in. Anyway, yes, I was explaining over the weekend, Donald Trump loves nothing quite so much as a launch party. This, I think, has a lot to do with what we've been learning about his behavior with women, with pageant contestants, with his models in particular. He loves nothing so much as having women under contract to him, particularly women he finds attractive and who are also young, if you can help it, and having them under contract to him as models or beauty pageant contestants. That's, I think, one of the other reasons he buys beauty pageants. The primary reason, of course, being so that he can walk in on contestants while they're naked and changing backstage in between pieces of the pageant. We learned that he has done that on multiple occasions. Seems to be an annual event, something that the contestants can all look forward to, whether they are in the Miss Universe pageant or all the way down to the Miss Teen USA pageant. Donald Trump will walk in on you naked. That's what the pageant is about for him. That's why he buys them. That's why he owns several of them. But they can only fill a few days a year. There's only the pageant happens once a year. There's, of course, all the preliminaries that he can go to and walk in on the people naked there. But that's not enough. And sometimes it just calls for having all of the beautiful women you can find to surround yourself with, whether or not they're naked. And sometimes you have to make sacrifices in life. Generally speaking, Donald Trump will launch a new product every couple of months. Mostly, it's not for profit because none of them are profitable. They almost all go into bankruptcy and die eventually. Those that he owns, anyway. Those that he is merely licensing, well, that's still an excuse for a launch party. And go ahead, Google it up. Take a look around for Donald Trump and launch party, and you might search Google Images while you're out there looking for it too. What he does, he he announces the launch of some stupid thing, and it has a launch party for it, and he invites all of his rich friends and his celebrity friends. And at that point, they simply stock the place with the models that he has under contract to him. Or occasionally, if there is a pageant underway or in close proximity time-wise, he requires the contestants to show up. And I think they're just all contractually obligated. He keeps a stable of dozens of his favorite, most attractive young women under contract, obliging them to show up at his various events, whether he's launching Trump Vodka, Trump TV, if that should come to be the case in the future, for that matter, Trump Soho. Like, we're even talking about launch parties for condo developments that he doesn't build, he merely licenses his name to. So whether it's Trump Soho in New York, Trump Baja in Mexico, Trump Punta del Este in South America, there's all sorts of things like that. And accompanying each one of them is a launch party. And that point, he gets to attend the party and stock it with all sorts of, all his favorite girls who are under contract, basically, and everybody gets to ogle them, perhaps do more. And that seems to be his primary motivation in life, is getting to the next launch party. That's just kind of what he does in life. Very weird, very sad, but not a surprise. Anyway, I am looking forward, as I said this morning, to Trump TV's eventual bankruptcy. Many people talking about this. Apparently, I guess Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, has something of a media empire, I guess you would call it. I think he owns, is it the New York Observer that he publishes? And his dad's got money. So he's a little bit like Donald Trump in that sense. And I guess the son-in-law is taking the lead in tossing around the idea that they may launch a Trump TV following his election defeat. But again, like Trump Taj Mahal, Trump Tower, Trump Plaza, whatever you've got, it's ending in bankruptcy, and I think we can all look forward to that. Here's a question for you. Do you, who would even rent office furniture, say, to Trump Television? Would you be crazy enough to take that contract? Hi, it's me. I'm calling from Trump TV headquarters, corporate headquarters, and, we're wildly irresponsible broadcasters, just like the name says, and we, of course, have a reputation for stiffing all of our vendors and suppliers. So I was wondering, could you send over, please, an order of 10,000 cases of copier paper? I'm going to need some computers and office equipment, furnishings, etc. What? No? You would? No? Not interested? That's really strange. Of course, there will be people who are willing to supply and people who haven't heard that he's insane and doesn't pay anybody. People who get the idea that for some reason Kushner would be in charge and he might be more likely to pay somehow. Or there are, of course, people who will essentially donate their time and effort and product because, like an in-kind donation to a political campaign. I don't care if I'm being ripped off. I want to support Trump TV. On the other hand, does Trump get up in the morning to do Trump TV, or does he just, I don't know, I assume he outsources most of that to others. I can't imagine it really being a huge, or as he was, a huge force of any kind, but lots of people asking lots of questions, including whether or not that would require FCC approval. Of course, I don't know whether it's going to be a real television station or not, and I suppose if it's just merely an internet production and distribution channel that other networks can pick up programming for, or whether they can put out their own programming pending FCC licensing, then I guess it doesn't matter. And most of his audience, I assume, would be perfectly willing to sit there and watch via computer. You are, so I mean, how crazy is that? I don't know. I guess we're proving the market for it. Okay. Well, much to catch up on. Greg Dworkin here to help us catch up with it. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Don't forget, when you're launching Trump TV and it's all based on bombast and not real business plans, you get to say, and let me throw out the possibility that it'll be run by Roger Ailes. I'm not saying it will be, but it might be. And don't forget, he built an entire empire and has a great track record. So therefore, it's real, and give me money.
Yeah.
Is it real that Roger Ailes is going to do this? Well, he might, and that's good enough, so give me money.
Yeah. That's true. Anything's possible. I mean, there's no end to the grift on the right side there, so I suppose I shouldn't be terribly surprised that someone would at least try it. And that's the idea, is run away. If the only idea is to abscond with the seed money, then sure, there'll be a Trump TV. You bet.
Right. Anyway, some things to go over here. I got a lot of polling stuff to do, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Sure, there's plenty of other stories to talk about, important ones. And they include rigged elections and non-rigged elections and the firebombing of a GOP office, North Carolina, I believe. And they're all important, but lots of polling stuff, so I want to get to some of that. We'll try to do as much as possible today, and if not, we'll add some tomorrow.
All right.
So let's start with the new poll out this morning from the GW Battleground poll. And this is done by one of those joint thingies. It's done by Lake Research Partners and the Terrence Group. So you have a Democrat and Republican together doing it. That's kind of like the model that the Wall Street Journal poll does. So they try to keep bias down as much as possible. They have a 5-point lead for the generic ballot. Others have as much as 7. We probably need 7 to 8 to take the House back as a minimum. But that also assumes that Trump voters get depressed and stay home. The top line numbers in this particular case are the head-to-heads. Now, this is a Republican-leaning poll. Back in April, it had Clinton over Trump 46-43. In September, on September 1st, it had Clinton over Trump 42-40, so that was a 2-point lead. And as of this morning, has a 8-point lead, 47-39. So trends are definitely in Clinton's favor in that regard. There's also a new poll by the Alaska Democratic Party showing essentially a tie in Alaska.
Yeah.
Trump +1 in Alaska, and a new YouGov poll this morning, just out, showing Clinton +3, I think it is, in Georgia.
Yeah.
So when Trump said he was going to expand the map, he kind of meant it. Right? There's a morning consult poll out, and I have that way down at the bottom of the stuff that I sent you. Right. That's got 42-36 in Clinton's favor. So what's happened ever since the audio leak, the Billy Bush leak, Trump's numbers have gone from 39, 38, 37, 36 in subsequent weekly polls, and Clinton stayed the same, 41, 42, 42, 42. So it's widened from a 2-point lead to a 6-point lead now. And again, this is a slightly Trump-leaning poll. The big ones that came out were the big media polls. And let's start with the Wall Street Journal NBC poll. That came out Sunday morning around 9 o'clock. Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton. Similar in outreach and supporter intensity. But the bottom line there is Clinton 48, Trump 37. That's an 11-point lead in a 4-way. And a 10-point lead in a 2-way. And there's a lot of interesting nuggets in that poll. 29% favorable for Donald Trump. And according to the pollster Fred Yang, the Democratic pollster who does the NBC Wall Street Journal poll along with the Republican, I think is McInturf, Fred Yang says that Trump's favorables have never been over 30.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, that makes it very difficult to win.
Probably about right, yeah.
When you're in that situation. Other nuggets, among women, Clinton leads by 20 points, 55-35, and Trump leads by men by 3.
That's not a lot for what Trump was counting on, I'm sure.
No, he needs more. More from the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. Among white male college grads, Clinton 41, Trump 41. Among white women without college degrees, Trump 43, Clinton 39. John Harwood observation. Another Harwood observation. By race, whites +11, and non-whites +60 for Clinton.
Okay.
Right?
That's quite a lot.
It is. Dave Wasserman notes, however, there is a problem, and that is the generic ballot. It's only a few points for the Democrats. And there's a specific question that's asked, would you be more likely to vote for, and this is something we're going to have to watch, a Republican candidate who will be a check and balance to Hillary Clinton and congressional Democrats, or a Democratic candidate who will help Hillary Clinton and congressional Democrats pass their agenda. The Republican check 53, the Democratic candidate 40. So when you see a Russ Feingold race get a little closer than you thought, or you scratch your head and say, how come Trump is getting clobbered in Pennsylvania, but Toomey is holding on, and so on and so forth, or even why is Marco Rubio competitive in a state like Florida where Trump is going to lose? The answer is, as Donald Rumsfeld might have said, you go to elections with the electorate you have, not the electorate you wish you had. So you have people who think this way. Do they understand what it means? No. Does it matter? No. Can you convince them otherwise in 3 weeks? Maybe. If the Trump freefall continues, we might get there. But that's a specific problem we're having. On the other hand, a little good news here. They did a separate oversample of Latino voters in this poll to try to figure out what's going on. And Clinton is leading Trump, according to Mark Murray, 70-17.
I see.
In a two-way race. And in 2012, that was 71-27.
Oh, well, it was rather overwhelming even then.
Yeah, but even better by 10 points.
Yeah.
And that's good. And that's, of course, the hope is people actually vote. So that was the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. The other one that was getting a lot of attention paid to it was the Washington Post poll. And that's where Clinton holds a 4-point lead. But there's a lot buried in there that's kind of important. So you figure, listen, if you want to step back and look at the big picture, if the race is somewhere between 4 and 11 points, that adds up to 15 divided by 2, 7.5. That's just about exactly where the Huffington Post pollster aggregate is. And so that's reasonable, but none of them have Clinton losing. All of them have Clinton winning. And as a matter of fact, if you want to step back and look at it from a numbers point of view, there's this really nice graphic that Pew sent out a couple of months ago that I was just circulating this morning. I even have that somewhere on your list from this morning. It's way down at the bottom. It's a poll explainer from Pew Research, and it's just like the third one up from the bottom. And what it shows is just these theoretic issues in terms of what polls would look like for various people. Let's pretend that poll A has a Republican at 48 and a Democrat at 43. Okay. And it's got a margin of error of 3 points. That means that the 48 that the Republican got is somewhere between 45 and 51. And it means that the Democrat 43 is somewhere between, let's say 40 and 46. And they overlap slightly.
It's a tie.
So it's close. The Democrat certainly is trailing by 5 points, but it's within the margin of error. Take
Democrats
that same group of people, let's say the Republicans winning by 51 to 43, so that is an 8-point lead. And now that's outside of the margin of error, because the 46 that the Democrat got and the 48 that the Republican might have, since it's 48 to 54, are not overlapping. So the 8-point lead is significant, and the 5-point lead is still within the margin of error. And that's how it works when the margin of error is plus or minus 3.
Yes.
Okay? And so people understand that 8 is better than 5, and 8 is more significantly a lead than 5 is. But they also take the same idea and look at it not in terms of the individual numbers where that margin of error applies, but rather to the lead itself.
Okay.
If you have a 5-point lead, then basically you can double the margin of error to get a sense of what that means. If you have a 5-point lead and the margin of error doubled is 6
yes,
for the lead, okay, then that lead could be anywhere from -1 to +11.
that is big.
We're talking about the lead, not the actual number that the person got.
Right.
Since the lead can go from -1 to +11, -1 still means the other guy won.
Dope. Yeah.
So when you have a lead of +5, you can't say, well, the race is over, this person's clearly winning. Take that same lead of 8. That means you can go from +2 to +14.
Aha.
The worst you do is +2. It's still a win.
Well, 95% of the time, anyway.
So when you have a lead of 8, you are winning.
Yes. Which is, I guess, why we said at 95%.
Weird things can happen. You know, and the polls could be wrong, and maybe you got a wrong sample, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why you might have that 5%. But basically,
your standard deviation.
Most of the polls, and let's simplify this. We'll pretend that we're not doing online polls. We'll pretend that the confidence interval is the same as the margin of error. We'll pretend all the polls have margin of error of 3. In general, in your head, you could say, okay, if I'm looking at the lead and I'm trying to figure out if a lead matters, then a margin of error of 6 is what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And what's happened over the past 2 weeks is Clinton has added a couple of points. Basically, her lead has gone from 5 to 8. And for all of the polling models that use this to try to figure out what's going on, you'll see those, it's likely that she's going to win, go up and up and up and up. And where do they hit? Oh, 95%. There's your 5%. Maybe it's wrong, just as you were saying. So it's just a good way of keeping all this stuff in your head. And the reason I do that before we get to the Washington Post poll is because the Washington Post poll says 4.
Oh. 4 what?
4 points that Clinton is leading Trump. Now, it's doubled since the last one they did, which was 2. So it's moving in the right direction for Clinton. But 4 isn't enough to say, oh, this definitively shows that she's winning. So you see all of the Republicans, Trumpkins, and people who don't know how to analyze polls saying, look at this, it's statistically tied because Clinton's only up by 4.
Aha.
And that's what you'll hear this morning. It's not over yet.
Oh.
It's over. This is part of the range that we're talking about because really we're talking about she's got a 7.5, 8 point lead, and this is one poll at the low end, and then you have polls at the high end because when you have a 7.5 point lead, some polls are going to come in at 2, and some polls are going to come in at 14. And this one came in at 4. Does that change everything? No, it does not. So why, even in the ABC Washington Post poll, would it be 4? Why isn't it 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? Well, you know, partly it's the likely voter screen you throw on top of things. Kristen Anderson, pollster, Republican pollster, says the ABC Washington Post poll in one tweet, Donald Trump fans say he's a bad guy, but he's our bad guy.
Uh-huh.
While this happens, the GOP actually loses the moral high ground versus Clinton on ethics.
Oh.
What do I mean by that? Again, I got some of those pictures there in your feed there. But voters reject the central premise of Trump's campaign and say by 8 points that they trust Clinton more on ethics. And that increases to 15 points among independent voters. Okay.
That's what you want.
Right? 47 to 32, they feel that Clinton's more ethical.
Ethical. Ethics schmethics.
Ethics schmethics. Well, you know,
I might say that.
When people go ahead and actually have to make the final decision in the voting booth, things that matter are temperament, are you qualified, and this ethics thing actually is a bit of a stain on the Republican Party itself, which maybe moves down ballot, maybe takes a few years to move down ballot. But in fact, maybe it's the final death knell to the Clinton scandals of the 90s. Who knows? 57% in the new ABC News Washington Post poll found that Trump's suggestion that he would jail Clinton at last debate is inappropriate. It's bothersome that it's not 100%, but, you know, at least the majority of people think that.
Yes.
And also, it's pretty clear from the numbers that the Trump tapes make no difference to most voters, but you have to, interpret that carefully. If I already thought that he was a monster,
yes,
then these tapes don't change my mind.
That's true. If anything, they go to what they like to term, of course, our favorite, enthusiasm, or voter intensity, I guess.
Well, but more interesting is, do they change your mind and make you more likely to vote for him?
No. I hope that's
in there, right?
Yeah.
You know,
there are a
few.
few.
Less likely or won't make a difference. 35% say it's less likely, and 64% won't make a difference. And there's 1% who's more likely to vote for him. I guess they polled Billy Bush.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, I just
Democrats at 0. I'm happy to tell you.
Hollywood.
Republicans it's 2. 2% say they're more likely to vote for him because of this.
Annoy the liberal media.
Yeah, and independents 2%. But with independents, 38% say less likely and 60% won't make a difference. Again, interpret that carefully. You can't look at it and say it doesn't matter, because if 35% say less so, that's still a big number.
Yes.
Right. 70% of women have an unfavorable opinion of Trump, including 58% who are very unfavorable. Kind of hard to win when those are the numbers underneath all of this stuff.
It does make things more difficult.
Yeah. Let's see, what else do we have? Here's a big one that Nick Gorovich, who's a Democratic pollster. Quite a change in enthusiasm in the new ABC Post poll. Trump voter enthusiasm is down in an election that's mostly about base turnout.
That's
for time. September 8th, 85%. September 22nd, 91% enthusiasm for Trump supporters. Now it's down to 79%.
I think enthusiasm is a good thing to have.
It is.
And they don't have it.
By lowering it to 79 from 91, Clinton supporters are now more enthusiastic than Trump supporters because she stayed 81, 82, 83 the entire time.
Well, that's where I think the tapes tend to have an effect. The vote is a vote, like we have always said. A very, very super intense vote still counts as one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, when it's when you're playing the turnout game,
it matters. And let's take that even further and look at it in terms of the actual parties.
All right.
Okay, with GOP voters, it's now 64% favorable, and it used to be prior post poll 78% favorable. That's with GOP voters. Oh. So his faves are down with GOP voters.
Yes. Well, he embarrasses them. And when you have to answer and say, I'm going to vote Republican, or much less even having to admit voting Trump, yeah, it's embarrassing. People get flushed.
So within their base, within the GOP, Trump has 64% favorable and 33% unfavorable. A third of GOP voters find him unfavorable. Mm-hmm. Clinton, it's 77% favorable, 19% unfavorable. So the unfavorables within party are higher for Trump than Clinton. The favorables within party are higher for Clinton than Trump.
Yes.
So Nick the pollster says, these are cracks. You can start to see cracks here. And you can still see some movement down from my point of view.
Well, there's time left, so I imagine there will be movement down.
Right. So that's basically the polling stuff. I think that there's one other thing that one of your listeners had asked about, and that is the LA Times poll,
right,
from the other day, which was kind of semi-interesting. And there's two pieces there that I think sum up what's going on with the wacky experimental LA Times poll.
Will they do this again?
On October 12th, Nate Cohn had a piece called How One 19-Year-Old Illinois Man is Distorting the National Polling Averages.
Yeah, what?
And what he pointed out is that the way that the LA Times poll decided to construct their model is they knew that they didn't have enough representative samples for small samples, so they weight those particular small samples higher. If you have a black guy who's 19 years old, and you don't have that big a African-American population in your poll, or you don't have enough 18 to 34-year-olds in your poll, that guy is going to be weighted higher than the same voting preference as a white guy who's 39 years old. So when he votes, he changes the poll more than the older white guy.
Okay.
Our Trump-supporting friend, says Nate, is a surprising big part of the reason. In some polls, he's weighted as much as 30 times more than the average respondent and as much as 300 times more than the least weighted respondent. So those decisions make for odd result. It weights for very tiny groups, which results in big weights, like we just said. And also, it weights by past vote. So if that guy also claimed that he had voted for Obama in 2012, whether he did or not, then he would be weighed on the, I want an even number of Democrats and Republicans, or to reflect somehow that, whatever the latest survey is of Democrats versus Republicans. And if he says he's a Democrat, but he's really a Republican, then I'm going to put him in the Democrat side, but that means that I actually have more Republicans and Democrats than I thought. And if other people did this, you get the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so between those two factors, overweighting and going by past election claim, you wind up having a poll that is not correct.
This is like voter fraud. Outrageous.
Well, it's poll imbalance. They didn't do it on purpose.
I see.
But it worked out the way it worked out.
If a 19-year-old tells you he voted for Obama, don't believe it.
Yeah. No, one 19-year-old Trump supporter probably isn't distorting the polling averages all by himself, says David Lauder, who's the LA Times reporter assigned for explaining all of this. So, and by the way, in the poll today, I think that Trump's up by 1. So they go through the weighting and how much difference does weighting make, and this daybreak poll, is it called, does it go further than typical weighting? Yes. This poll, he says, the pollsters wanted to make sure the sample was not just balanced for big population groups like men and women.
Those are
balanced also for smaller groups like young minority voters who are often underrepresented in the polls. Leading political scientists have suggested such an approach to make sure polls accurately reflect the U.S. population. 4 years ago, some polls ended up being wrong because they didn't fully represent the population's diversity. So this is an experimental attempt to try to increase diversity in the poll itself. Is there a downside? Sure. And that's where the 19-year-old poll respondent in the New York Times article focused on comes in. If a poll has a small number of people who belong to a particular group, young black men, for example, there's always a risk that the few respondents won't truly represent the group's views. When pollsters then give those few people extra weight, the results, especially for that subgroup, can be skewed. In the case of the Daybreak poll, there's one young black respondent who's a strong supporter of Trump. He hasn't responded to the poll every week, but when he does, he pushes up Trump's number among African Americans. So how does the poll deal with that? Well, when the poll's results shift suddenly, the margin of error increases. Remember that? So the poll actually, when it prints or is on your screen, shows a band. And within that band is the results. And most of the time, the entire election, the number results that they give you are actually within that band. And what he's saying is, in a very subtle thing that if you're not paying attention you won't notice, if we have things like that, the band will get bigger. You can't really tell that by looking at it, but there's times you can. And by the way, only very rare times, like mid-September, has the results of the poll been outside that band.
Wow.
Most of the time it's well within. Today's, for example, 44.8 Trump, 43.7 Clinton, so that's 1 point lead. It was a Trump lead from September 13th through October 10th. Then it was even, and then the last 2 days it's been a +1 Trump. Again, it's a 7-day poll that rotates. And so, firstly, it's wrong. If you want the simplest explanation for how to read the LA Times poll, just take whatever number you have and add 6.
Okay.
Right? It says Trump 1. Okay, it's probably Clinton +5 in this particular poll. And that's within that range that we talked about, 2 to 14.
Yes.
So, that would make perfect sense. What they're trying to do makes sense from a pollster and from a product perspective. They're testing Diet Coke, new Coke, and maybe it won't work. So then they'll rejigger it and do it different next time.
I think they're testing Pepsi Clear right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
New Coke wasn't exactly a success either.
True. That's although I've heard that. Okay. We're not getting too far into the Coke thing, but but Pepsi Clear we know was an outright flop. So we'll go with that.
Exactly. It's the Edsel if you want to go back that far.
Yes, we could do that.
But the fact is that there's reasons for what they do. It's not that they're deliberately putting their thumb on the scale in order to favor one candidate or another. They're actually putting their thumb on the scale because they're trying things to see if they can make it more even. Yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yes, they are biased in favor of scales.
But that's the explanation for the way the LA Times poll is done.
So, but it's okay. So it's not a 19-year-old guy.
So it's not all because there's this one 19-year-old that's screwing everything up, and when he doesn't get on when he decides not to cast his vote that week, it's not like all of a sudden the poll's right, and then when they cast the vote, it's wrong. It's not like that at all.
No. It looks like it, but it isn't somehow.
It looks like it, but it isn't.
All right. Well, exactly. They'll be tinkering with that model, no doubt. They'll have an autopsy, even if the Republican Party won't.
Right. Anyway, just because we wanted to be as complete as possible and give you an idea of what's going on with polling, there's one last one. that we'll mention, and this is the CBS Battleground poll. And this only looks at certain states: Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Only those states. And Clinton has a 6-point lead.
Aha.
That's from CBS, and that's out as well. Support among women. On September 18th, Clinton had 45-40 in the battleground states. Support among women now within those battleground states from 45-40 to 51-36.
Okay.
So the idea that the tapes don't do anything is nonsense. But what they do is subtle. Now, here's an interesting thing, because again, we have to see this play out. You could easily envision a scenario where there is a hierarchy of what Trump says or does or said about him that matters more to voters than other things. What I mean by that is we know visually seeing him on tape, like in the Billy Bush broadcast tape,
yes,
matters more than hearing it, and it matters more than reading about it.
All right, so like on the Howard Stern radio tapes.
Yeah. But we also know that things said in his own voice matter more than things people said about him.
Yes.
Which matters more than reports of what people said about him.
That's where, okay. I cited the radio things in the wrong place then.
No. You're correct. But when you put it all together, if you actually have Trump in his own voice saying something, then you get the Billy Bush tape, and it has a huge effect. If you have accusers coming out and they say in their own voice that Trump did this or Trump did that, and there's at least 9 of them now, brave women who came out and with cooperation from family and stuff like that, are saying that this is what Trump did. That doesn't matter as much as Trump in his own words saying he did those things.
Right.
But it does matter more than, let's say, an AP story saying that I talked with a bunch of people from The Apprentice, and on background he was like this all the time. That last one is other people saying things about him, but not in their own voice. The middle one there is the women saying things, but the top one is Trump saying these things himself. So as somebody pointed out, Jake Tapper pointed out, one of the Trump surrogates, and Trump surrogates have to be the lowest form of life, lower than slime mold. They have to go on TV and defend this guy.
Yes,
and probably the worst of them, of course, is Rudy Giuliani. But they're all like that. They go out and say, "Well, I can't defend what he said, but he didn't. What he said wasn't really what you think he said." That kind of stuff.
Okay.
And one of them said, as far as all these Trump accusers go, it's a he said, she said situation.
Yes.
Somebody said that to Jake Tapper, and Tapper said, no, it's a she said, 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 she said situation.
We have to weight it in terms of the numbers of women who say this.
Right. That's one point. And the other observation is when you say he said, she said, you mean they both say he did this.
That's true too.
Because he said it, and then all these other women said it.
Right. That's the bottom line there. Is that he just said, I do this, and they said you did. I've seen it in about 5-6 different forms. People have tweeted it rather brilliantly that the essential problem is he says, this is what I do, and then the women say, that's what he did, and then he says, you're lying.
Yeah, and that somehow doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So that's why you have that September 18th, Clinton 45, Trump 40 with women in the battleground states, and now it's 51-36. And so, yes, it does matter. It matters with key groups. So part of the response to all of this is almost predictable. If you're a Trump supporter, you're going to say, if I didn't hear it from him directly, then it's not moving me. Because it's all those other people saying things, and I choose not to believe it. In fact, I choose to believe that they're coming out now only because Clinton's paying them to. A little projection there.
Oh, yes, right.
Because that's the way he does it. Clinton's paying them to, and therefore I reject all of that, and that just makes me mad, and I'm going to support him even more. And you have enough of those people so that his support doesn't drop that much.
Yeah.
But it drops where it matters. And it certainly prevents him from gaining. And in fact, you go back to Fred Yang, he's never been popularity more than 30%. And over the last month, he's gained nothing in regard to extra followers in a situation where he was already trailing. And that's why you have the situation that you have now. And sure, people can step back and say, well, with 3 weeks to go, it's just at the margin at 7.5, where you might say that it's not like totally in the bag for Clinton. Maybe something could happen, maybe Meteor, maybe more WikiLeaks. Of course, the only thing those WikiLeaks have been proving are, number one, it's boring to read about what campaigns actually do. They float a bunch of ideas that they often don't actually wind up initiating. And at the same time, they actually show her as thoughtful and competent and thinking about stuff before she does it. I think there was one leaked email from Podesta that showed that she started to prep for the debates last year. Oh my gosh.
What?
What a bombshell. She's actually thinking ahead about what's going to happen and tries to do the work and prepare for it.
This is awful.
This is awful. It's terrible. I think she had help from Ron Klain and some other people who actually know what they're talking about. So you have this situation where things are fairly frozen, and one can, I think, make a pretty good argument that what we're seeing here is a Trump ceiling that, because of events over the past couple of weeks, including the tapes and the accusations from women coming out, we don't know that they're done yet. LOL GOP pointed out that you could have a pretty good betting ring going on here, trying to decide which is the higher number. Trump's electoral votes when the election happens, or the number of women who accuse him.
All right. Well, I think they're all being paid.
Yeah, but the point is you're not going to grow your vote. You're frozen. You're stuck. And so you lose. So then we turn down ballot. So what happens to the down ballot people? Well, the race is getting so heated and the invective is so high that when you have Republican senators, let's say for the sake of argument, who are running in their own races, do they stick with Trump and get the women in their constituency upset with them? Do they run away from Trump and get all the Trumpkins upset with them? Those two constituents who might be Republican voting constituents cannot agree on this. And therefore, whatever you do, you're going to lose some votes. So that puts all of them at risk. Now, you have that factor that I was talking about that, yes, but in the end, voters may want to have some checks and balances on what they now perceive of as a pretty clear Clinton win. But that might get overwhelmed if the win is big enough. And so that's the dynamic that we'll be looking at in the next 3 weeks.
All right. The next 3 weeks seems like an important period of time.
Well,
something at the end.
The only
of this
poll that matters is
rainbow?
the one on Election Day, and we're starting to see Trump folks say that.
Well, luckily we're and you can now say it from the winning side too. I guess at this point, it is true. It's the only one that counts. And now, I guess the difference is if you're saying, and I'm looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to being over.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely looking forward to that. The only poll that counts is Election Day, and I can't wait. You're winning.
Right. Here's a fun stat.
And we got a lot of work to do. You're losing.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to throw in there while you're waiting for it to be over. Here are the favorability ratings among Hispanics in the NBC Wall Street Journal Telemundo poll. The one I was talking about that, 17% like Trump compared to 27% in 2012. So they're looking at the favorability ratings. Michelle Obama's a plus 62.
Okay.
Which is incredible. Barack Obama plus 48. Hillary Clinton plus 31. The Democrats plus 31. Kaine plus 13. Pence minus 6. GOP minus 41. And Trump is minus 67. Okay? So think about it. There is a 129-point difference between Michelle Obama and Trump.
There's not that many points. Well, there are 200, I guess.
Yeah. So you can out of a scale of 200.
Wow.
Trump has hit 127. That's pretty remarkable.
It's like a black hole.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, he's got a high specific gravity, I guess.
Yeah. Anyways, Paul Krugman points out the point is Trump didn't just happen to melt down. Clinton triggered his meltdown. That's
true. That's one of the great things about this election. And she called it so far ahead. That was terrific. The guy you can bait with a tweet. So I will.
Here's some other random observations I'll give you in the few minutes that I have left before I go. A lot of these are from I was sitting in for Tim today, so Meteor Blade, so I did the pundit round this morning. And
okay.
Here's some random observations. David Zurowick, who is a media critic from the Baltimore Sun, pointed out how Megyn Kelly's debate question foreshadowed story of 2016, race and death of male privilege. The 2016 race and the death of male privilege.
Wow.
Right?
Megyn?
So that was pretty interesting.
Of it that way. Okay, well,
and Mark Harris from New York.
This is
you probably saw this over the weekend. If you didn't, you might have. Mark Harris said, "I just watched Jake Tapper interview a Trump voter, some elderly, lying, unemployed racist. Apparently, he also used to be mayor of New York."
I know that guy.
Yeah, you probably do. So I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, he really had
in 2012, not 1912. In 2012, final polling average had Obama plus 1.5 over Romney. Obama won by 3.9 points. Yes. Clinton average is currently 7.6. Oh. She's headed for a blowout, says Ryan Lizza.
Yeah. Well, it sure looks that way.
Mm-hmm. How do you think that it works out that Jeff Sessions, who is, I guess, head of Judiciary, says that they're attempting to rig this election?
Oh, yeah, well, no one likes that. Sessions really, I mean, he and Giuliani are really all in, I guess.
Yep,
but
they're stuck now, right? Elise Viebeck points out that CNN and NBC both have security guards protecting their reporters at Trump rallies.
Yes, I have seen that, and that is pretty remarkable. I understand not only that, but in some places where local police have made people available, they are escorting the groups into and out of the press pens, and in some places in riot gear with shields in case of projectiles.
I have a quickie tweet storm. I have a very long one from Ashby Law, which points out why and how elections actually work. You might find interesting. That's the first piece I have up on the Pundit Roundup today.
All right.
But this one is Tom Nichols on what truly matters in the election. Tom Nichols is a professor at the Naval War College, a conservative, not a veteran, as he points out to me.
Oh.
He's a former U.S. Senate aide, and he's a senior contributor to the Federalist, fairly conservative guy.
Yes.
And he tweets under Radio Free Tom, so people may know him. But here's what he says. Here's why Trumpers and folks like Hugh Hewitt should stop asking never Trump guys like me about policy or SCOTUS. This election is no longer about policy. I don't care what Hillary's views are on abortion or taxes. I mean, I do, but not right now. I especially don't care about Trump's view on anything because he didn't have any. He didn't have any policies, no plans, just Trump. Instead, the election is now between two groups. Those supporting a direct attack on our system of government and everybody else. Yes. This is no longer conservatives versus liberals or Dems versus GOP. This is an ignorant mob trying to destroy the Constitution versus the rest of us. He's referring to the whole election as rigged stuff, like Jeff Sessions, and he's implicating Jeff Sessions in this too. At this point, Trump's platform is a farrago of
Farrago? I don't know.
Of Russian-inspired demands to destroy our system in order to save his delicate ego. His advisors, a clutch of opportunists and kooks, and certainly he means Jeff Sessions, are pushing mad conspiracy. They are thus at odds with all other Americans. In effect, Trump has removed politics from this election. It's now about where we stand on protecting our system of government. I'm never Trump because I believe in our system, our elections, and our democratic culture, including the peaceful transfer of power. If you think this is still about SCOTUS or abortion or anything but your right to vote without threats or foreign influence, you're wrong. Take your arguments about right versus left somewhere else. In my view, this is now an election solely about preserving our democracy.
Well,
I agree with him.
Like the Civil War.
Yeah.
But it was really about states' rights.
Economic insecurity.
Yes, right. That's basically it, right? That economic insecurity is the new states' rights. It wasn't really about slavery. It's about economic insecurity. Farrago, I had to look up. It's a confused mixture. I'm confused about that.
Yeah.
I have never seen that.
Well, learn something every day. And then this is 33, so it's very long, but I thought you might be interested in it because it's like process stuff. Ashby Law on why U.S. elections are not rigged. These are Republican lawyers for political leaders, influential companies, and important causes, and they take the point of view of shut up about elections being rigged or not. Let's explain why. So I leave that for you if you want. If not, it's on the Pundit Roundup for this morning. Folks can go and read it. Gotta go. Thanks so much for having me on. I know I didn't let you talk much, but I had a lot of material I wanted to go through. And like learning what Farrago means. Yeah. Not how to pronounce it, but what it means.
I think you're about right as what it looks like. I look up the pronunciation and I realize I don't know what all these squiggles mean.
Yeah, isn't that a town in North Dakota or something?
Yes. And Fandango is where you can get movie tickets online.
Yeah, something along those lines. So thanks so much. This is Greg Dworkin speaking at my friend David Waldman in the morning. And thanks so much for listening, whether you're downloading podcasts or wherever you do it. We're very, very grateful. David, I think, has had a lot more listeners. I know he's got a ton of followers on Twitter. That's because he's very funny. And thanks again. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll do it again.
Okay. Thanks very much, Greg. I'll straighten all these other points out. You've given me a lot to think about. By the way, Salvatore Ferragamo is a designer. I think looks like it's chiefly shoes. I know I've seen that name before. So just keeping everybody straightened out there. Farrago, Fandango, Ferragamo, Lou Ferrigno was the Hulk. He's a bodybuilder, or was a bodybuilder, and I don't know what he's building these days. But I want everybody to keep all of these things straight. Ferrocarril is how you would say railroad in Spanish. Okay. Anything else that we need to straighten out? It's a very confusing jumble here. By the way, speaking of things we have to straighten out, Jeff Sessions, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, or as I now call him in light of his comments about Trump's comments about women, his comments about Trump's comments, Jefferson No Regard Sessions, he'll give you no regard whatsoever, is not the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's still Chuck Grassley, believe it or not, assumed you're dead guy. And Greg has another one. I have to talk about the Ferengi, also as a Star Trek race of loony aliens who, they're very money obsessed. So it's kind of sort of the Donald Trump of aliens, I guess. Jeff Sessions, though, and I guess we really should call him Jefferson Beauregard, No Regard Sessions every chance we get, is third ranking on the entirety of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Chuck Grassley, then, former chairman Orrin Hatch, ranks second. Jeff Sessions ranks third. He may, in fact, we should take a look. What are the subcommittees? He's probably got a subcommittee chairmanship somewhere. Let's go see if it's an important one with respect to voting integrity. I'm just sort of... here we go. Subcommittee on Immigration and the National Interest, which is kind of a new subcommittee name, I think. Sessions is the chair there. That will likely be... Talk about a bunch of nuts for your subcommittee chairs. Mike Lee is chairman of the Subcommittee on Antitrust, Competition Policy, and Consumer Rights. Subcommittee on the Constitution is John Cornyn at the chair. Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism is Lindsey Graham. Subcommittee on Immigration and the National Interest, Sessions. Subcommittee on Oversight, Agency Action, Federal Rights, and Federal Courts. And I guess that's maybe where you would be focusing on, if there were an investigation into voter fraud at the Judiciary Committee, I suppose it might happen there. Ted Cruz is the chair there. I don't know how Ted Cruz breaks on that question of Trump's favorite talking point. Sessions does sit on that subcommittee, though. No surprise there. They sit on 3 or 4 different subcommittees. There's last subcommittee on privacy, technology, and the law. Jeff Flake, the chairman there. Interesting placement. If only Jeff Sessions had some access to some kind of investigatory body where he could do something about the widespread voter fraud that he alleges. But alas, tyranny prevents him from conducting any such investigation, because after all, that investigation falls under that prerogative falls to our duly elected officials, and of course, with so much vote rigging going on, who even knows who our elected officials are. I am not 100% sure Jeff Sessions is a senator, and perhaps we ought not to treat him like one. I don't know whether they should let him back in the building. For all I know, I'm the senator from Alabama. We don't know these things, and they're unknowable, in fact. Well, that's one of the consequences of insisting that every vote is rigged, I guess. But, well, I guess they just don't have the long-term vision to see that, or they just think people will only recall the part of it that they flog. And that's probably actually the closest thing to true about the whole thing. All right. Well, let's see. Other things to think about. We could take a look at some of this process stuff from the election lawyers. It is somewhat interesting to hear them explain exactly why elections are not rigged. But I do have the feeling that I'm guessing that almost everybody who listens to the show knows that that's the case. And if they're actually looking for, well, actually, most people listening to this show, if you found yourself in a situation where you needed to argue with or convince someone who did claim to believe that the elections were rigged, I don't know that you would put yourself in such a situation. I don't know that you wouldn't just walk away from that. But if it's a relative, like at Thanksgiving or something, although at that point it'll be too late. If you're having the relatives over for Halloween, I don't know what you would be doing that for, but perhaps that would be your opportunity. There's no reason. But okay, it's good stuff. We ought to know it. We might as well say it on the air. Ashby Law, I guess, is that the law firm known as Ashby. Just checking out. There are lawyers for political leaders, influential companies, and important causes. And Greg says they are Republican in their leanings, or perhaps in their clientele. Maybe that's it. Let's dispense with this notion, they borrow from Marco Rubio, that the election is rigged, shall we? First, U.S. elections are held in public places, in open rooms, in plain view of all assembled, no back rooms, no secret doors or hallways. Of course, the conspiracy theorists there say, well, but they're counted in back rooms. And that's true, but we're only on number 2 of, what did he say, 30-something tweets? Ordinary citizens, not government bureaucrats, serve as election officials and conduct the elections. They check in voters, confirm IDs, keep records. Laws require these elections officials to be both Republicans and Democrats, drawn from lists provided by local political parties. But by the way, asterisk for that. That's actually, some people might say, part of our problem, or certainly goes to one of our overarching background themes of how the system actually is built to institutionalize favoritism for the two major political parties, right? If our election integrity is premised on the fact that elections officials who safeguard the integrity of the elections have to be, by law, drawn from the two parties, I mean, well, I guess that effectively is a good thing, as the vast majority of voters belong to or identify with one of those two parties. But why do we leave other parties out? I guess part of the reason is the sample size from the other two parties makes it awfully difficult to not get a kook, I guess. If you only have 10 people who are members of a party from a certain election district, and really to begin with, very often, in order to find yourself not necessarily in philosophical sympathy with a third party, but actually serving as one of its officers, I don't know if that's the kind of person you necessarily want to have around for those sorts of procedures. Armando, you're moved to join us today. How are you?
Hey, David, how are you?
Okay, what's up?
Listen, I actually wanted to highlight a story that,
all right.
Frankly, Greg was wrong again.
Oh, no.
Because he didn't highlight it.
Oh, well, he may have been right about it. He just was wrong not to say so.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's this story. Fox News yesterday reported that a senior FBI official said that the view inside the FBI was that Hillary Clinton should have been charged on the email situation.
Fox reports that a
A
functionary
senior, they
inside
quote, I quote, senior FBI official. I don't, who knows what that means.
says that Clinton should have been charged.
No, that there was near unanimity inside the FBI to charge her.
Oh,
Why is
okay,
this significant? I mean, it's Fox News, etc. Well, it's significant for two reasons. Number one, Trump retweeted that view.
Sure.
Second of all, it's significant because the FBI director, James Comey, testified under oath before Jason Chaffetz's committee that it was unanimous inside the FBI that there shouldn't be a charge.
Aha.
In essence, Fox News and Donald Trump are charging that James Comey committed perjury.
That is amazing. Resign, Comey. Where's that woman with the sign who sat outside at our lunch hour alone?
You're joking, and we've
right.
come to the point where every crazy charge we're joking about it, but the FBI director.
Yeah, that's the necessary conclusion. Fox believes he perjured himself.
They perjured himself.
Oh, well.
And I don't know why Jason Chaffetz isn't convening a hearing immediately to find out or referring charges that the FBI director perjured himself in front of a House committee.
He's very busy.
Is he?
Well, I don't know. He may be thinking a lot about Abraham Lincoln. That very often gets him teary-eyed. So, I'm not sure. Except, well, when did it happen? Over the weekend? I don't put it past him.
This weekend, yes. The story came out yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if they're back in town tomorrow, as is usually the case, I don't know that he wouldn't start asking those questions. In between now and Election Day, I mean, you can do it, but he actually is going to be somewhat busy tending to his own affairs, getting a hearing convened. But he could certainly go out there and threaten it, absolutely, and say, we may not get to the bottom of this before the election,
Let's
but
be
I will
clear,
have this
he's
hearing.
already promised post-election hearings.
Yeah,
on
well,
that,
here's one for him
but
to
not
do.
on this matter.
Well, he didn't know about this matter. He foolishly and naively believed the testimony given under oath by the director of the FBI, who's a Republican.
Wait, but I do want to repeat this.
Yeah.
Fox News and the Republican nominee for president have charged that the FBI director,
Yes.
one of our highest law enforcement officials,
He will obviously go to jail.
committed perjury.
Yes. And Jason Chaffetz, however he pronounces his name. By the way, good time. You need to invoke inherent contempt, Mr. Chairman, and imprison the FBI director in the basement of the Capitol, if you're serious.
That's what I'm saying here.
Right. Well, he doesn't.
This is actually the
so
most
far.
clear-cut allegation of criminal wrongdoing that I've seen here. Now, everybody said, oh, well,
it is.
Hillary did this and that and whatnot. But, there's questions of intent and everything else. It's just, at best, let's say you wanted to indict her. It's a tough case because you got to prove motivation, etc. I mean, I really don't know how they could have possibly have done it. But here, there is no ambiguity. Comey testified clearly and expressly that the decision was unanimous within the FBI. All the investigators agreed. All of them, he said.
Yes.
This report says that's a lie. That, in fact, most of them disagree.
Well, it's possible that they did, in which case there's nothing to do but charge Mr. Comey. Yeah,
If
said
this wasn't Trump, this wasn't Republicans, and this wasn't Fox News, and there was a charge that the FBI director perjured himself in front of Congress, that'd be a pretty big story, wouldn't it?
So, who says this? By the way, I'm looking on. Let's see. FBI agents dismayed by failure to charge Clinton. It looks like we have Is that Bill Hemmer interviewing somebody here?
I don't know.
I've
It's
got a
Catherine
video clip.
Hentridge or whatever her name is.
Well, hey, that hasn't bubbled up to the surface yet.
It hasn't bubbled anywhere. Not a single news organization has covered this except for Fox News.
Yeah, there you go. They're first to the story because they're fair and balanced. Well, look, if you make a charge like this, then I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I wouldn't be shocked if they spent the rest of the election insisting that that was true and that someone ought to be arrested or at least investigated for it. I just don't know whether. I mean, that's the kind of story that will take a little while to percolate to the surface because everybody, I think all the rest of the news organizations know. If you really put that to them seriously and said, "I need your thoughts on what to do about this," they would. Yeah, that's where you start tugging at the collar, like, "Oh my God." Well, if we're going to cover it without changing the facts, I mean, we could report that somebody else is reporting it, but yeah, you're eventually going to have to end up on, if we are going to give this any credence, then there needs to be a hearing.
Well, I mean, the president endorsed the charge.
Yes, right, the Republican nominee. Well, he endorsed it. And I guess that's where the pile of lies ends up working to his advantage, where everybody just says, "Oh, it's another one of these things," as opposed to, if we no longer fact check the guy other than to say, "Duh, he just lies about everything," and they'll just add this to the pile because this is a lot of work to sort this one out, if you believe that. But
No,
Fox
it's actually
is helping
pretty
them.
good. There are people who say, there's a source for Fox News. Make Fox News reveal their source. Right?
Yeah. I guess so.
This
That's
is
interesting.
an allegation of a crime. The crime of perjury.
That's an interesting thing. Yeah. Now, if you get into the mechanics of investigating it, presumably you have a congressional committee investigating, and they say the problem is that we think that James Comey committed perjury because Fox News reported this thing, and you gotta, I guess at the outset you would have to call the Fox News reporter forward and say, "Tell us your story," and then you'd have to say, "Now, where did you hear this thing?" And he'll say, "I need to protect my sources," and that sets up an interesting dynamic for the Republicans on the committee to try to compel Fox News to reveal its sources.
Well, she identified it as a senior FBI official. How many of those are there?
Well, I don't know.
30?
Perhaps. But, I mean, how far does the investigation go if it remains one unnamed official versus on the record from James Comey? I mean, if they can't call this official even behind a screen or whatever to say, the committee needs to hear your allegations and know that it isn't just Fox News saying this, how do they get to that?
Well, I mean, pretty simple, it seems to me. There is a need to question all senior FBI officials.
Oh, I guess they could do it that
Mr.
way.
Comey's statement.
They do it like Talking Points memo would. They call every single person who could qualify as a senior FBI official and ask them point blank. Did you agree?
If that's too difficult, well, then I believe the Fox reporter should be held in contempt.
Well, ironically, that might have to be the mechanics of it if they can't simply ask every senior FBI official. And then, of course, as they all come in and say no.
I believe they can, actually. I mean, asking 30 people isn't that hard.
No, they could do that. And, of course, each one of them, one at a time, comes in and says, "No, I was in agreement with the director." And then Fox broadcasts how they're all just trying to cover their asses and save their jobs.
Well, that would be new accusations of perjury.
Yes, right. So never-ending accusations of perjury. At which point, I guess Chaffetz finds himself unseated as chairman because he's a perpetual embarrassment, and also it's almost time up for him for that chairmanship. But well, that'll be interesting. I mean, if they just continue the chain of perjuries, I don't know what we're supposed to make of that.
But let's be clear, everybody in the FBI is sworn to uphold the law, and if they know that a crime was committed, to wit, if they know that the FBI director committed perjury, they're duty-bound to report this.
More so than calling a Fox reporter and saying, I dissented on an internal poll of senior officials with regard to charging Mrs. Clinton. That would be the thing to call the news with. I have proof of perjury from the director. I could become the director. I might be that senior. Let's get rid of this guy.
That's right. Hey, it'd be good for your career. Come on.
Right. So that's interesting. So a senior FBI official who would be duty-bound to point out a criminal violation like that, or I guess at this point it's perjury. Yeah, it's still a criminal charge to perjure yourself before Congress.
Absolutely. It's a felony.
So whoever it is, if they know this to be the case, then they know the consequence to be that the only conclusion you can reach is that the director perjured himself, which is a felony, but I just choose not to bring that up.
Now, I think that's an interesting...
prosecutorial discretion.
There's an interesting irony here.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting irony, but here's one additional one.
Yes.
The reality is what Comey did with his public statements was unprecedented and unethical. He should never have done that in the first place. He never should have been called before Congress to talk about his decision-making, and it really was outrageous of him. I do think
to agree to go,
it would be supremely ironic if he suffered consequences for his breach of ethics, which is what he did.
Huh. Yeah, I can see the irony. So you think that he should have refused the subpoena?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
he should have. And it's a very easy privilege.
Yeah, I mean it's deliberative
law
process.
Enforcement deliberation privilege.
Yes.
That is absolutely recognized. There is no way Congress could have made him testify not in public. And the reality is, the only reason they wanted him to testify was that he would testify in public. So it would have been pointless to have him say anything if it wasn't going to be able to play it on TV.
That is interesting. So he chooses to honor the subpoena, chiefly putting his, people will have to make this decision, I guess, but chiefly putting his professional reputation above the integrity of and the separation of powers issues as between the branches and the integrity of the DOJ. We should never let anybody have any insight into our deliberative process. The DOJ more so than anybody, you would think.
Absolutely. Consider this. Imagine being called up on any random law enforcement decision to prosecute or not to prosecute.
Yeah.
In any case, because you can't just say, well, it only applies to Hillary Clinton. Well, I guess you can, but then you'd be really having quite the bill of attainder there. So why not call a congressional hearing to talk about the decision not to charge the killers of Tamir Rice?
Yes, you could. Well, we could do that. They could. They won't.
They shouldn't.
Right. Well,
they should not. We can't do law enforcement this way.
That would convince them that we shouldn't, certainly.
Well, I listen.
Or at least
what I like to know, of course, I'd like to know what, that decision-making process on all of these things. But we have to either we respect the law enforcement process or we don't. I mean, that's why you don't have public discussions of these decisions, because then it becomes subject to political forces. We try to insulate certain institutions from political influence. When you can, as a Congress or as any legislative body, call forward law enforcement officials to explain their decision-making in this way, it really is a dangerous thing. I mean, it creates inordinate pressures on law enforcement officials to justify their decisions for on a political basis.
Yeah, I'm thinking back now to the investigations into the Bush era, the George W. Bush administration, Justice Department's voting rights section, and having the same sort of inquiry and finding out, for instance, that the staff attorneys almost, and I think how did we learn that the staff attorneys unanimously found, for instance, Texas and Georgia's redistricting plans discriminatory on their faces, and recommended unanimously rejecting those plans, and that they were instead approved by senior political appointees in complete disregard for the staff attorney's recommendations. We must have learned that the same way, or in a similar way. At the time, anyway, I was glad that we knew that. It didn't amount to much, but
I'm not sure how we found that out. I'm sure there wasn't a press conference held by the FBI director.
No, likely not. Well, yeah, I guess we'd have to look back, and that's a good process question. How did we develop that information? And it may have been, I assume, leaks of some kind.
I mean, again, I'd have to refamiliarize myself with that story, but
yeah,
I think that the real issue is a little different, at least to me. But
well, certainly on the spot with this Comey situation, that's a good point. If somebody knows different and didn't say so, then either it's a fabrication or a dereliction of duty. So I think I'm on hold here with Armando. But okay.
Sorry, David, I was paying a toll. As I told you, it's my tradition to call you when I'm on I-95 in Florida.
Right. Okay, so it's a toll.
This is just one more of those occasions.
Yeah, we can give you the Armando calls in from the car sound effect is here.
That's right. This time, it's been a fairly smooth ride.
That's good.
No close calls.
All right.
As of yet.
Well, that's good.
I will tell you, as a side note, I saw a very strange sign driving towards Miami that said, "Farmers for Trump."
Farmers for Trump.
Farmers.
Okay.
And I'm actually was kind of curious, what exactly is it about Trump's policy on agriculture that attracts farmers to Trump? Does he have an agricultural policy?
No. I don't know. It's farmers are rural, and rural people love Trump because he's for common sense. I'm guessing.
Okay.
I don't know. I guess it's just the rural thing, and I don't know. Like, there's certainly no reason to believe that. Well, I guess maybe they farm things that are subject to foreign competition and low-priced foreign imports, and they just extrapolated that Trump will stop all of that, and everyone will have to buy my whatever it is they farm, my sugar beets. They're not coming from anywhere else.
The thing about that is most agricultural products, the United States is a net exporter. One of the strongest supporters of free trade should be agriculture, not they shouldn't be looking for trade barriers. I mean, if we're looking at this rationally, which is almost certainly a mistake on my part, to look at it rationally, there's obviously some other reason why farmers would be for Trump.
Yeah, I don't know. The pitchforks?
Pitchforks. There'd be a run up pitchforks.
That could be it.
American Gothic.
Yeah, I don't know why anybody. Well, it's hard for me to imagine why anybody would be for Trump, but I guess it's just your basic. It's clearly meant to invoke this, stereotype of salt of the earth farmers who are, look. I hardly even have time to make this Farmers for Trump sign in between my honest, hard work and all of my fervent prayers. But I did manage to make this homemade pigment paint from my self-sustaining farm that gets no subsidies whatsoever, and just put it alongside the road here. Are you driving through agricultural country?
A little bit.
Oranges?
Pardon?
Citrus?
No, I'm further south. It's
Oh.
more just vegetables and things like that.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Vegetables for Trump, I could believe.
You know, I always like that rural story. And there's that guy, Chris Arnade, who I can't stand, who Greg likes. He lives apparently in a rural area now. But I grew up in a rural area.
Yeah.
And in agriculture, which I know that sounds weird.
Does it?
Coming from me, but it is where I grew up. I don't know much of anything about agriculture. I can tell you about the sugar business a little bit. But, I did not I wasn't a future farmer of America.
Yeah, well, that's
member.
That's slave labor area, not so much agriculture.
Well, it certainly had a lot of things that weren't attractive.
Yeah, well, okay.
But the reality is that the notion of rural versus urban, I think, is more a function of race than anything else. I don't really think it's quite based on the idea that if you're rural, you're that different from urban voters. I just think that if you're rural, you're much more likely to be white. But there's
also that, to be sure, because there's plenty of rural black communities that are no more fooled by Trump than any urban community, black or white.
That's correct.
But yeah, there's a strong overlap. There's a lot of there's more leeway out there to lean politically based on race, and fewer people, a less diverse community available to call it out in numbers, I guess, is really what it comes down to. I'm sure that there is a rural-urban divide just because you have to have different things are important to you and are part of your daily life.
I think there's no question there's some differences there. I would look more to education and race, though, as being the main drivers there. I think the rural-urban divide comes in third.
Very likely. Or at least in my thinking, and there are those who disagree, no doubt. But yeah, farmers for Trump, I think probably is more about, people who wish they were on farmersonly.com for Trump. That's basically, they're just
farmersonly.com.
That stereotype. Salt of the earth, southern / western flannel wearing country and western music listening. I love to fish and I hate, girls who like manicures. Something.
Yeah, maybe. Guns, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Varmint hunters for Trump. Meth cookers for Trump. I could buy that. These are all possibilities. Okay. Well, are you paying another toll now? Is that what's going on? Or are you just driving through a dead zone? All right. Well, we'll see whether we are able to wring any more information on the ground in Florida, the battleground state of Florida, out of Armando at some point, either later today or later on in the week. There's plenty of other things to get to, of course, and several of them come from outside of my own head. So why don't we get to some of those things? I've been holding in reserve a number of pieces, as you are aware. First of all, I guess, more than anything, we deserve to give time to the Michigan gubernatorial race of 2018, if only because we've been talking so much about how often we've thought about playing Rosalind McGregor's latest contribution to the show, which is now going on 2 to 3 weeks old. We really ought to get that out of the way. Plus, of course, we have a few other contributions from other friends around the country, some of whom have chimed in before several times, and others who are just one or two times that we've heard from them on the air. Let's round up a couple of those things, because we've had some volume of response, and I appreciate it from everybody, and I can only truly demonstrate my appreciation by by rolling their tapes. Let's start with Rosalind then.
Good morning, David. I'd like to share with your listeners an article about the upcoming 2018 election for governor in Michigan. And this article is from Susan Demos, and it appeared in a recent Dome magazine. Susan writes about the fight between Attorney General Bill Schuette and Governor Rick Snyder, even though they're both Republicans. The conventional wisdom is that Michigan will have a Democratic governor on January 1st, 2019. Term-limited Governor Rick Snyder, who squeaked by in his 2014 re-election fight, which Republicans often wondered if he was trying to lose, is now the third least popular governor in the country. He's taken hits over his administration's callousness and incompetence over the Flint water crisis. But that wouldn't have wounded him so deeply if voters were otherwise enamored with his business tax cuts, road plan, and education policy. However, the truth is that the bloom has been off the rose for a while. That isn't unique to Snyder. It's typical of many second-term governors. What isn't clear is what Snyder can do to bounce back. Naturally, Democrats are thrilled at the prospect of 2018 being a referendum on Snyder. Their two likeliest nominees, U.S. Representative Dan Kildee out of Flint and Ingham County Prosecutor Gretchen Whitmer out of Lansing, are chomping at the bit. Snyder's unenviable numbers put any would-be Republican successor in a bind. It's not difficult to see why there's little enthusiasm for a Lieutenant Governor Brian Kelly candidacy, even though the 39-year-old has made it clear he expects to live in the governor's mansion one day. You would think Attorney General Bill Schuette would be similarly hamstrung. After all, he's appeared on the GOP ticket with Snyder for the past two elections. He's also known as being even more conservative than the governor, which is not the kind of change Michigan voters would typically endorse after tiring of Snyder. But Schuette might be able to pull this off. This week, he stood with teachers and broke with Snyder. After the Court of Appeals ordered the governor to return $550 million to school employees to fund retirement health care, Schuette announced he wouldn't defend Snyder if he appealed to the Michigan Supreme Court, knowing full well that the stubborn governor would do exactly that. Yes, Bill Schuette, the toast of the Tea Party who's fought same-sex marriage, Obamacare, and affirmative action right up to the Supreme Court, just did a solid for a core Democratic constituency. He veered left without breaking a sweat. Most importantly, Schuette knew he could earn headlines for his chilly relationship with Snyder. This comes on the heels of the AG's very public rebuke of the administration's lack of cooperation in his Flint investigation. That is hardly a recent development. Last year, Schuette came out against Snyder's road tax hike proposal 1, and the AG also fought for pensioners' rights during Detroit bankruptcy. In fact, Snyder and Schuette have chafed from the get-go, as have their staffs. Notably, Schutte's team hasn't changed much, whereas Snyder's front office has been somewhat of a revolving door. Schuette will have to be his own man in order to escape the Snyder stain. It's a perilously narrow path that boasts few recent success stories. John McCain came close in 2008. His disdain for George W. Bush was certainly real, but just being a Republican was enough to do him in. Can Schuette really expect to fare any better? All I know is that people underestimate the Attorney General at their own peril. So that's a look at the 2018 race where we have AG, or Attorney General Bill Schuette, duking it out against Lieutenant Governor Brian Kelly to face off perhaps against either Dan Kildee or Gretchen Whitmer. Thank you so much, David.
We appreciate it, Rosalind. I don't see how you can lose a Republican nomination race if your name is Schuette. That's perfect. Of course, it's not spelled the way it sounds. Those of you playing along at home, Schuette. So I'm glad to know the pronunciation, certainly. And maybe he should think about changing it to Shooty. Schuette. How can you lose? All right. Well, that's what's we've got that then out of Michigan, and I'm still backed up on Rosalind McGregor. We also have another of the less time-sensitive pieces, but we can move through all of the various things we've been getting from our contributors. And let's move on. I guess we can do these back to back and just sort of go round robin around the country and pick up on some of the other contributors' efforts. John R., who sent us an article from out of Texas. He seems to be a Texas focus. I've got a couple in the queue here. Let's try this one because this one sounds pretty interesting. About this raises eyebrows all the time. Anytime you say Texas and book bans, that raises eyebrows. We're all worried about what's going on in Texas. Let's try this one here from John R.
This article is from the Texas Monthly. Why have Texas prisons banned thousands of books? Over 15,000 titles are banned from Texas prisons, often based on passages taken out of context. Dated September 29th, 2016, by Doyin Oyenini. The last week of September marks the annual Banned Books Week, in which organizations such as the American Library Association highlight the ever-increasing number of books that have been challenged or banned around the world. There seems to be a conservative slant to the books that are most frequently challenged, since a common refrain is that the material is sexually explicit or contains homosexuality, but even the Bible has been challenged for its religious viewpoint. Books are sources of education, enlightenment, and betterment, and as the American Library Association notes, we should highlight the value of free and open access to information. Unfortunately, some of the most systematic censorship of books happens in a place that, in theory, should be focused on the kind of rehabilitation that knowledge can bring, American prisons, and Texas prisons are no different. After Texas Monthly published an excerpt of Dan Slater's Wolf Boys, Two American Teenagers and America's Most Dangerous Drug Cartel last month, Texas Department of Criminal Justice added the book to its list of more than 15,000 banned publication. The narrative nonfiction tells the story of Gabriel Cardona, who worked as an assassin for the Mexican drug cartel and is now serving time in a Texas prison. According to Jason Clark, a spokesperson for the TDCJ, the book was banned because it contains information on how to conceal and smuggle illegal narcotics. The offending section from page 124 reads, Mario purchased pickup trucks from which he removed panels and lights. The trick was packing the drugs in a part of the vehicle where the body wouldn't lose its hollow sound when slapped. That section hardly counts as a how-to manual on smuggling narcotics, but according to TDCJ, it could be instructive in setting up a criminal scheme, which is one of the guidelines used in their policy for banned books. According to a 2011 report by the Texas Civil Rights Project, other guidelines for deciding which books to ban are if the book contains contraband, if it includes information on how to make weapons, drugs, or explosives, if it has the sole purpose of disturbing a prison's functionality through strikes, riots, and gang activity, if the person decides the content is harmful to the prisoner's rehabilitation by encouraging deviant criminal sexual behavior, or if it contains sexually explicit images. While the policy makes sense, a book detailing the steps to making a weapon probably shouldn't be in the hands of some prisoners. Critics, including Slater himself, argue that the rules are applied so arbitrarily as that they do more harm than good. Once a book is banned, it's banned for all prisons under TDCJ unless the prisoner appeals, without access to the book in question to help build their argument. The appeal is then sent to the TDCJ's office in Huntsville, where the mail system coordinator reviews periodicals while a review committee looks at books and all other materials. A book can only be appealed once, and once it's banned after an appeal, it can't be removed from the list unless the prisoner decides to pursue a lawsuit. According to the TCRP's report, 87% of appeals are denied. One of the major problems of this process is that it is often reliant on personal judgment. When a book lands in the prison mailroom, the clerk checks the database of TDCJ's banned books. If the book isn't there on the clerks scan it for any offending words and content. A book can end up on the TDCJ's banned book list if a mailroom worker flags it, and the results have been pretty inconsistent. Women Behind Bars, The Crisis of Women in the U.S. Prison System by Silja J.A. Talvi was banned for a section in which a female prisoner recounted a childhood sexual assault that eventually derailed her life. It was classified as sex with a minor. Not censored, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, a novel entirely about a man's sexual attraction to a child. The Arc of Justice, a saga of race, civil rights, and murder in the Jazz Age by Kevin Boyle, was banned for racial content for using the N-word in a section that describes a lynch mob going after African-American men. Meanwhile, Hitler's Mein Kampf is still allowed. According to TCRP's report, this is the big failure of TDCJ's policy. The spirit of the rules allows state officials the flexibility to allow prisoners access to literary and educational material while maintaining the ability to censor materials that would pose a genuine threat to prison security. However, a consequence of this discretion is many arbitrary, unreasonable, and astonishing decisions, as well as regular inconsistencies, largely because the material is twisted entirely out of context. Michelle Dillon, the program director for a non-profit called Books to Prisoners, described TDCJ's policy as a slippery slope. What started out as legitimate concerns has resulted in the banning of 15,000 titles, including classics such as Alice Walker's The Color Purple. TDCJ's unchecked censorship is the very danger that Banned Books Week seems to highlight.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, I guess that was relevant to, I guess I missed my opportunity on Banned Books Week to get to that, but always an interesting story. Usually we're hearing lots about the way the Texas school districts choose their textbooks, but I guess this fits into our school to prison pipeline theme, right? They're banning books on either end of the thing now. A difficult article to read through with the acronyms too, the two competing and slightly different cadences to these to the two acronyms, the TDCJ, or the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, versus the TCRP, the Texas Civil Rights Project, made it somewhat difficult to get through. They don't really roll trippingly off the tongue, that's for sure. And interesting. So, and yeah, weird anomalies, like a book that on American history and very real racial tensions, banned for racial content because of contextual use of the N-word during a description of a mob lynching. But Mein Kampf, okay. And by the way, I think you could make a pretty strong argument under the banning policy that Mein Kampf is perhaps actually more of a danger in the hands of prisoners or prison populations organized along the lines of Aryan Brotherhood versus other in-prison and regular street gangs. But hey, for some reason, they don't want to take that constituency on. Just kind of an oddity. Okay, so having switched gears entirely and given some time over to some of our contributors, let's shift gears back. We still do, by the way, have another piece from Brian Monroe, who has sent us. Let's see. Let me catch up on the latest and see whether we ought to hang on to those. I don't know if we want to. I don't think clearing the queue. Well, certainly it's not in the cards. As John has sent to me about. I think I still have about 4 pieces from John and one more from Rosalind. And let's see. Brian's has got. Well, at least it's. Let's see, we got one on, did we do the one on Marla Maples and Trump? Yeah, we did do that one. And a little bit more, well, you know what, maybe we ought to roll Brian's here too, because Brian's will bring us sort of back to the topic that we're used to spending our time on, the elections, etc. And let me see, I got to make room for this in Soundboard too. It's actually quite overpopulated, and find an empty spot where we can roll that. And why not? We'll visit with Brian as well and give him his due, and then conclude with our own readings from Pocket.
Good morning, David. It's Brian Monroe from Canada, Canuck Pundit on Twitter. I found an article in the Globe and Mail here in Canada. And the article was written by Sarah Kendzior, who is a St. Louis, Missouri-based commentator who writes about politics, the economy, and the media. So the article is called, "It Doesn't Matter Who Won the Debate, America Has Already Lost." 8 years ago, I was a student at Washington University in St. Louis, which hosted the vice presidential debate between Sarah Palin and Joe Biden. We laughed that in an election marked by the promise of Barack Obama's hope and change, our campus was the one hosting Ms. Palin, whose ignorance and outbursts had made her a national joke. Little did we know how far we would fall. Today, the Palin debate summons feelings of nostalgia, not for Miss Palin, but for an era when she seemed an anomaly instead of a harbinger. On Sunday night, I watched the debate on the Washington University campus, surrounded by students who are casting their first votes in the vilest election in U.S. history. Some students coped through gallows humor, holding signs proclaiming things such, "George Washington grabbed Martha by the P word." That sign is not a provocation, but an echo, because grabbing women by the P word is now part of the national lexicon, thanks to the tape of Donald Trump's graphic comments about women. This is the era of grope and change. Who won the debate? Does it matter? When this country has sunk this low, after a year dominated by bigotry and threats, and now revelations of sexual assault, is it possible to contemplate anything but loss? Loss of trust, loss of respect, loss of dignity, loss of purpose, loss of faith in our leaders, loss of faith in each other, in the ability of our media to challenge the candidate's worst behavior instead of exploiting it for profit, in the willingness of our leaders to defend the most vulnerable instead of exacerbating their pain. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel, wrote poet Maya Angelou, a St. Louis native. Sunday night, 10 kilometers from Ms. Angelou's childhood home, Mr. Trump took the stage and stereotyped black Americans, insulted Muslims, threatened to jail his opponent, and lied so blatantly about his past statements that we were forced to remember what exactly the Republican nominee had said about checking out that sex tape. Ms. Angelou was right. You never forget how someone made you feel. What we felt was gross and sad and scared. The campus felt coated in slime. The debate was a lurid soap opera in which everything unsaid loomed larger than what was spoken. The stagecraft lent itself to grotesque micro-dramas of physical exchange. You may not remember what the candidates said, but you'll remember that they did not shake hands. You'll remember how he stood behind Hillary Clinton, hulking and hovering. You'll remember his strange sniffing, his ceaseless interruptions, and her withering disdain. This debate was in the town hall format, in which ordinary citizens are supposed to set the tone. Instead, St. Louisans sat like hostage witnesses to a nasty and intensely personal conflict. The moderators fought to allow them to ask questions, but Mr. Trump ranted on about WikiLeaks, emails, Ms. Clinton being the devil, Michelle Obama secretly hating her. That was all part of one answer, and I have since forgotten the question. For the main thing his response conveyed is that something is deeply wrong with this man. The moderators were managing a toddler who may get access to nukes. At one point, a St. Louis Muslim woman asked the candidates what they would do about rising Islamophobia. I watched in horror as Mr. Trump spoke not of protecting Muslims, but of protecting citizens from Muslims, implying that all Muslims were terrorists right to her face. Her own safety as a Muslim woman was not even secondary. It was a non-issue. When Mr. Trump brought up slain Muslim soldier Humyan Khan, it was only as a prop, not as a human being. He claimed Captain Khan would have lived had Mr. Trump been president, as if he had not viciously insulted both of Captain Khan's parents, as if Mr. Trump had not repeatedly threatened to deport and ban Muslims, including citizens like the woman who had asked the question. Mr. Trump talks about people and to people as if they are not real, and as if their pain does not really exist. As time passes, I am sure I will forget his exact words, but I will never forget how his response to that woman made me feel, because quietly at that moment, I started to cry. Brian Monroe, from Canada, Kagro in the Morning reporting.
I like the sign off, Brian. Thanks very much for sharing that article and bringing us back to the topic of the American election. Yes, as a matter of fact, big topic. Big thing from the weekend, or big things that were not yet touched. Let's see. The most recent, we actually haven't talked about the fact that there was what is being reported as a firebombing attack on I believe, Orange County Republican, Republican headquarters, certainly a Republican campaign field office in, everybody seems to have a Orange County. Do I have the county right? Yes, Orange County GOP headquarters in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Interesting mostly for the reactions to it, and it's gotten to be something of a complicated case. Of course, it received front page coverage here at Daily Kos. Barb Morrill putting up the story of firebombing in North Carolina and failing the commander-in-chief test. What are we talking about here? On Sunday, it was reported that the local Republican Party HQ in North Carolina, that is in Orange County anyway, had been firebombed. And by the way, a bit of an inept firebombing. It definitely caused damage, and thankfully it didn't cause any more damage than it did. But, not the most ardent attempt I've ever seen. I got to be honest with you. The responses from the candidates are pretty interesting peeks inside of what's going on in the two campaigns. I'll continue with Barb's piece here, just noting that it had been firebombed and a nearby building spray painted with a message reading, "Nazi Republicans leave town or else." Thankfully, no one was injured, but it was a terrible crime and an assault on the democratic process. That's true. How, though, did the two presidential candidates respond? Hillary Clinton, of course, tweeting the attack on Orange County HQ, and then tagged with the @NCGOP, since it was via Twitter. The attack on the Republican office is horrific and unacceptable. Very grateful everyone is safe. Donald Trump's response, animals representing Hillary Clinton and Dems in North Carolina just firebombed our office in Orange County because we are winning. And also tagged with the NCGOP. Did we expect anything else? No, we didn't. But reports down there in the Charlotte Observer, the governor, Pat McCrory, also tagging the firebombing as an attack on democracy, although I think he's been largely absent from tagging the stoking of fears of voter fraud and vote rigging as an attack on our democracy. We, of course, would have tagged both of those along the way. Pat McCrory, of course, as I said, not only tagged it as an attack on democracy, but another Republican official called it an attack of political terrorism. And they do find the way to tag things domestic terrorism when it is other people doing things to them, interestingly enough. When it's shoe on the other foot, not so much. In a tweet, of course, they refer to Donald Trump's animals representing Hillary Clinton and Dems in North Carolina. Nobody knows anything about who did what. And as long as we're making baseless assertions, I will tell you that my first thought went to, a property associated with Donald Trump got firebombed. Was it heavily insured? But, of course, it's misleading for him to say that it was our office. It is of course, Orange County Republican headquarters. And, yes, Trump is their nominee, but I don't think Donald Trump has much of anything to do with this particular office. But anyway, Hillsborough police say somebody threw a bottle of flammable liquid through a window of the HQ, setting campaign signs, supplies, and furniture ablaze before burning itself out. Not a great firebomb. A swastika and the Nazi Republicans get out of town or else were spray painted on the side of an adjacent building. No damage estimates were available. The firebombing of a local political headquarters in Orange County is clearly an attack on our democracy, McCrory said in a statement. Violence has no place in our society, but especially in our elections. I will use every resource as governor to assist local authorities in this investigation. Hillsborough Mayor Tom Stevens said this highly disturbing act goes far beyond vandalizing property. It willfully threatens our community's safety, and its hateful message undermines decency, respect, and integrity in civic participation. It's become kind of an interesting and complex story, of course, not just because it becomes difficult to sort out. I guess the question of, well, you got to condemn political violence wherever it happens, although it is an interesting conundrum. Political violence against people who advocate political violence. Do you support it? No, you shouldn't. What do you do with it? The other interesting development that's come out of it, it's a great debate, as everything is, among progressive circles. Do you respond to something like this, as some did, with a drive to get Democrats to recognize the inappropriateness of this and manifest it in donations through a GoFundMe account to help restore the office? Do they show, well, we are the bigger people here. Not only do we reject the idea that Democrats or anyone connected with Hillary Clinton was involved, but people who are Democrats and affiliated with or in support of Hillary Clinton are going to openly help undo the damage and put you back on your feet. On the other hand, quite right that people are pointing out, it's a tragedy and everything, but is the proper response for progressives or other Democrats to send money to the Republican Party of North Carolina, or perhaps just the Orange County, North Carolina Republican Party? But I got to believe that, for instance, I assume that they're not out of step with the state party position on things like transgender issues and their crazy bathroom law and the various other discriminatory efforts that they've been making, both in that area and in voting rights and voting access. It's uncomfortable to think about the possibility that can you earmark your money? And even if you could, do you want to earmark your money? It all being fungible, of course. We always love to use the fungibility term to repairing the office. That leaves funds free instead to print up literature to distribute around the state about how they're right about transgender issues and about voting access issues. Do you really want to be a part of something like that? It's been very interesting watching people react to it, to say the very least. I think I come down on it this way. It's usually pretty hard to get me to part with money, period. This is not going to work for me. And I almost feel like, well, I don't know. Maybe this is just an additional excuse not to contribute money to the Republicans in North Carolina. But there's almost a part of me that says, well, if I send money as a Democrat and say, Democrats stand for doing the right thing here, can that in any way be used to acknowledge, or be interpreted as an acknowledgement that Democrats had something to do with the destruction in the first place? I hope not, although I feel fairly certain that there will be some people who are just that low that they might try to make that connection. Other thing that happened over the weekend that I can quickly at least make mention of, and I'll save my next theme for tomorrow's show instead. There was a brief to-do over the weekend with yet another flurry of women making allegations of sexual assault against Donald Trump. But the most amazing thing, I think, was the Trump campaign's attempt to discredit the original, I think, story of this wave of stories. The woman who claimed that she was seated next to Donald Trump on the airplane. And although we got through the nonsense of the armrest truthers, it turns out that the campaign thought it was a good idea to bring forward someone who claims to have been an eyewitness to this incident, or rather, to have been an eyewitness to the fact that the incident didn't take place at all, or at least not as described. It's a very weird situation. This guy claims to have seen the situation unfold and that it was in fact the woman who was the sexual aggressor in all this. She gleefully admitting to him as Donald Trump excused himself to go to the... Oh, I'm sorry. It's too disgusting. I can't even talk about it. It's too disgusting. He got up and went to the bathroom, and she said, it basically revealed that it was her plan to try and, I don't know what, lure Donald Trump into a sexual relationship and marriage based on her having been upgraded to first class on this flight. All sorts of problems with that, of course, including the fact that Trump himself had denied ever being on that flight or ever meeting this woman, and their character witness comes forward and says, oh no, I was there, she was there, he was there, I have a photographic memory. How you reconcile that, I don't know, but logic isn't their strong point. But worse than all of that is it turns out that the guy has a bit of a reputation himself. His last name, as I recall, what was it? It's Gilbert Thorpe. Anthony Gilbert Thorpe. And that's pretty unusual and eminently Googleable. And as it turns out, the guy actually has a long history as a British conservative political dirty trickster and setup man. It's really kind of strange. As it turns out, he has been making allegations over the past several decades, actually, and most strongly in 2014, that he was responsible for procuring underage rent boys, as he put it, for members of the conservative Thatcher government in the 1980s. This is the character witness that they decided of their own volition to bring forward. I find that rather fascinating. Hi, it's Steve. Have we got anyone other than the underage rent boy pimp no? All right. Well, let's just roll him out then. Why not? We'll go with that guy. Well, that pretty much took that character witness refutation or rebuttal out of the news cycle probably within about 25 or 30 minutes of their announcement that this was the guy they were going with. He's actually got quite a fascinating history, this guy, and it really was fascinating to read about the stories and stunts that he tried to pull in British politics back in the day with, by the way, I'll just note at some level anyway, the participation of Rupert Murdoch and his Sun tabloid newspaper. They actually paid for about half the cost of this stunt that this guy tried to set up and trap conservative MPs. A conservative activist himself, too. Very strange guy, very strange story. Perhaps there'll be more to explore in that in the coming days if they try and resurrect this guy's story. In the meantime, the after show takes over Netroots Radio. Of course, after we're done here, what will they be talking about? Let's see what we can squeeze in. A Florida court strikes down the state's policy of throwing away absentee ballots if the voter's signature does not exactly match the one on file. One of Trump's Stepford surrogates claims that 1.8 million voters are perpetrating, quote, some sort of fraud. And Arizona's largest newspaper reports that the amount of assassination, public execution, and firebombing, threats that they have received proves that their endorsement of Clinton was the right call. What's coming up on the last half? How about that after this?
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
The last half, they'll be reporting that armed police from 3 states and 8 departments swarm Native Americans praying alongside a road in North Dakota. And the Great Barrier Reef is not dead, but it's very, very sick. How about those stuff with the Native Americans? Where's my Hobby Lobby peeps at, folks? Stay tuned for the after show next.